My daughter used my retirement savings to build her bakery, then handed me an apron and a broom and called me the help. I smiled, walked to my truck, and made 2 phone calls. 48 hours later, she was leaving voicemail after voicemail begging me to pick up. She had no idea what I'd already set in motion. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. The smell of cinnamon was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the parking lot that Tuesday morning. April in Savannah carries its own kind of sweetness. Jasmine climbing the fences, the river air mixing with whatever the bakeries on the block were doing. My daughter's place sat on the corner of a good street, the kind of location I'd spent 6 months helping her find. The hand-painted sign above the door said Magnolia and Crumb in the loopy cursive she'd practiced at our kitchen table when she was 9 years old. I sat in the truck for a moment, just taking it in. 3 years since we'd signed the lease. 3 years since I'd written the check that made all of this possible. Inside, the morning rush was winding down. A few customers lingered over coffee. The display cases still half full with croissants and those peach Danish things that had earned her a mention in the local paper. My daughter was behind the counter, her dark hair tucked under a cap, laughing at something her business partner was saying. She looked happy. Successful. Exactly what I'd wanted for her. She spotted me and the laugh faded a little around the edges. Not all the way, just enough that a father would notice. Dad. She came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. I didn't know you were coming by. Can't a man stop in to see his daughter's place? I said. I was in the neighborhood. That wasn't entirely true. I'd driven 40 minutes to get there, same as always. But something had been sitting wrong with me for the past few weeks, something I couldn't quite name. And I'd learned over 63 years of living that when a feeling won't leave you alone, you'd better pay attention to it. Her business partner, a woman named Cassie who I'd met maybe 4 times, gave me a polite nod from across the room and disappeared into the back. My daughter started straightening things behind the counter that didn't need straightening. We're actually kind of busy prepping for tomorrow, she said. There's a corporate order. I won't be long. I settled onto one of the stools. Just wanted to check in, see how the books are looking this quarter. The straightening stopped. The books are fine, she said. And then, before I could respond, Dad, we talked about this. I appreciate everything you did to get us started. I really do. But this is my business now. You don't need to keep tabs on the finances. I looked at her for a moment. I funded 60% of this business, sweetheart. I have a right to see the books. What happened next, I wasn't ready for. She set down the dish towel. Her chin came up in a way I recognized. She'd done it at 15 when she thought she was right about something she was completely wrong about something she was completely wrong about. But this wasn't 15, and this wasn't an argument about curfew. Actually, she said, you don't. Excuse me, legally, you don't have a right to anything here. You gave me that money as a gift. Your words, Dad. You sat at my kitchen table and you said, I'm giving this to you. No strings. Remember? I remembered. I remembered because I'd meant it the way a father means it, as love, not as a contract waiver. I meant I wasn't going to charge her interest or demand repayment the way a bank would. I did not mean I was signing away the right to know whether my life savings were being managed with care. I said no strings, I told her carefully, because I trusted you, and I'm asking you to keep trusting me. She picked the towel back up. I need you to let me run this without interference. Honestly, Dad, it would be easier if you just came in as a customer, not as an investor, not checking numbers. You want me to come in as a customer, or don't come in at all. She said it quietly, gently even, as if that made it land softer. I love you, but this is my space. The staff gets uncomfortable when you're here asking questions. It affects the energy. The energy. I sat there on that stool for a moment, looking at the sign above the door, the one in her 9-year-old cursive. I thought about the afternoon 3 years ago when she'd called me crying because the small business loan had fallen through when she didn't know what to do. I'd driven straight to my financial advisor's office. I'd liquidated part of my retirement account, the account I'd been building since her mother and I were young and didn't have anything. I handed her a cashier's check for $140,000, and I told her no strings because I was her father and I loved her and I wanted her to succeed. The energy, I said again, mostly to myself. She was already moving toward the back. I stood up from the stool, put on my jacket, and walked out without another word. In the truck, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and didn't start the engine for a long time. The jasmine smell was coming through the cracked window. The sign was visible in my side mirror. Magnolia and Crumb, her cursive. Something cold and clear settled over me. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like the feeling you get at the top of a ladder when you realize the ground is further down than you thought. I picked up my phone and called my friend Gerald, who'd retired from 30 years as a tax attorney and still knew people in every relevant office in the state of Georgia. "Gerald," I said when he picked up, "I need to ask you something about gift law and business equity. You got a few minutes?" "For you? I got all afternoon," he said. "What's going on?" So I told him. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then he said, "Arthur, tell me exactly what paperwork you signed when you gave her that money." That was the right question, and it turned out I hadn't given my daughter a gift. Not exactly. I'd written a check, yes. I'd said no strings, yes. But 3 years ago, when her accountant had set up the business structure, there had been paperwork. Lots of it. My daughter had been overwhelmed and grateful and in a hurry, and she'd asked me to just sign where the accountant pointed, and I had, because I trusted her. Because she was my daughter. What I had signed, it turned out, was a limited partnership agreement. Gerald walked me through it over the phone, then connected me with a business attorney named Paul Whitmore, who agreed to see me the next morning. Paul was a serious-looking man in his late 40s with reading glasses. He kept taking on and off. He spread the documents across his conference table and went through them page by page while I sat across from him with a cup of coffee I was too tense to drink. "Mr. Tur, Arthur," he said. He'd taken to calling me that within the first 5 minutes, the way Southern lawyers do. "These documents establish you as a limited partner, holding 40% equity in Magnolia and Crumb LLC. 40%, I repeated. 40%. Your daughter holds 55. Her business partner holds 5. He set the page down. Now, limited partners don't run the business day to day. That's the general partner's role, and that's your daughter. But you have specific legal rights. You're entitled to financial statements. You're entitled to a percentage of profits. And under this clause here, he tapped the page. Any decision to take on significant new debt, alter the ownership structure, or sell the business requires limited partner consent. That means your consent." I looked at the page where he was pointing. The print was small, but my name was there, clear as anything. "She told me yesterday that I had no right to see the books," I said. Paul Whitmore looked at me over his reading glasses. She was mistaken. The drive home was different from the drive over. I had the windows down even though the morning had turned overcast. Something had shifted, not just the legal picture, but something in me. I thought about the past 3 years. The gradual drift. The way my daughter had started answering my calls less frequently, then started answering them with that particular tone, the one that said she was tolerating me. I thought about the holiday dinners where I'd sat at my own son-in-law's table feeling like a guest who'd overstayed. I thought about every time I'd made myself small to avoid the accusation of interfering. I'd been making myself small in a business I half-owned. I didn't go directly home. I stopped at a diner I liked on the way out of the city, the kind of place with laminate menus and coffee that comes in a real ceramic mug, and I sat in a booth by the window and I let myself think clearly for the first time in months. My daughter was a good baker. She had built something real. I was proud of that, genuinely, the way only a parent can be proud of watching a child build something from scratch. But she had looked me in the eye and told me I had no place in that business, and she had been wrong. Factually, legally, in every documentable sense wrong, and she hadn't said it by accident. She'd said it to end a conversation, to manage me, to keep me quiet and grateful and out of the way. I ordered the eggs and toast and thought about what kind of man I wanted to be from here. The answer came to me somewhere between the first cup of coffee and the second. I called Paul Whitmore from the diner. "What are my options?" I said, "if I want to formally exercise my rights as a limited partner?" He laid them out methodically. I could demand a full financial accounting, all statements, all records, everything I was legally owed and had never been shown. I could enforce the profit distribution clause, meaning any profits that had been taken without proportionate payment to me were recoverable. I could, if I chose to, trigger the dissolution clause, which required majority partner consent to avoid, and since I held 40%, my consent was not automatic. If she won't negotiate in good faith, Paul said, you have significant leverage. I want to start with the accounting, I said. Send the formal notice today. He did. By Thursday afternoon, my daughter had received a certified letter from Paul Whitmore's office, formally requesting all financial records for Magnolia and Crumb LLC for the prior 3 years, citing my rights as a limited partner. The letter was polite. It was professional. It was also, by the look of the voicemails that started arriving Thursday evening, absolutely devastating to her sense of how things were supposed to go. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I was sitting on my back porch watching the light go off the garden, the way it does in the late afternoon in spring, turning everything gold for about 15 minutes before it's just dusk. My late wife had planted the rose beds along the fence 20 years ago. They still came back every year, stubborn and reliable in the way good things tend to be. I listened to the voicemails in the order they arrived. The first one was surprised. "Dad, I got a letter from some attorney. Can you call me back? I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." The second one was less surprised and more annoyed. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is not the way to handle this." The third one, which arrived Friday morning. "Dad, please, we need to talk about this before it goes any further. I'm scared, okay? I'm actually scared." That last one I played twice, not from cruelty, from something more complicated. The recognition that she had not been scared, or at least had not admitted to being scared, at any point during the 3 years when I was the one who'd needed reassurance. She had not been scared when she told me to come in as a customer or not at all. Fear, it turned out, was something she reserved for moments when the consequences arrived. My son-in-law called next. Dennis, who I'd always liked better than the situation allowed, who'd shaken my hand at the wedding and told me he'd take care of my daughter. "Sir, I think there's been a breakdown in communication. Irene didn't mean to hurt your feelings. She's under a lot of stress and she said some things the wrong way. Can we sit down together? The 4 of us?" I appreciated Dennis's decency enough to call him back. "Dennis," I said, "this isn't about hurt feelings. I'm a 40% equity partner in that business, and I've never once seen a financial statement. That's a legal matter, not a family one." A pause. "I didn't know that," he said, "about the partnership." "Neither did I until 2 days ago," I told him, "but I do now." I met with Paul Whitmore again on Friday afternoon. By then my daughter had retained her own attorney, which Paul said was a good sign. It meant she was taking it seriously. Her attorney had already been in touch with a counteroffer. They would provide the financial records, they would acknowledge my equity stake going forward, and they proposed a formal restructuring that would clarify roles and prevent future disputes. Paul laid the proposal on the table between us. "It's a reasonable opening," he said. "She's not fighting the equity. She's trying to formalize a structure where you're acknowledged, but your operational involvement is limited." What does that mean in plain terms? It means you get quarterly financial reports, profit distributions, and a seat at the table for major decisions, but she'd retain full day-to-day management authority. I looked out his office window at the street below. People going about their Friday, carrying coffee, walking dogs, existing in the ordinary way that felt very far from where I was sitting. "Is that fair?" I asked. "For a limited partner? Yes. That's actually how these structures are supposed to work." He paused. "The question is whether you trust her to honor it going forward. Based on what she told you Tuesday, that's a question only you can answer." I thought about it over the weekend. I took long walks. I tended the rose beds. I had dinner Saturday night with Gerald and his wife and didn't talk about any of it. Just let myself be a person at a table with friends for a few hours. Sunday morning, I drove out to the cemetery where my wife was buried and sat with her for a while, the way I sometimes do when I need to think out loud to someone who knew me before all of this. "She got your stubbornness," I told the headstone. I should have seen this coming. The wind moved through the oak trees overhead. That was all. Monday morning, I called Paul Whitmore and told him to proceed with the restructuring negotiation. With one condition, I was adding myself, a formal written acknowledgement signed by my daughter. that the original $140,000 constituted an equity investment, not a gift, and that my rights as a partner had existed from day one and had simply not been honored. It wasn't about money, it was about the record being correct. Paul drafted the language. My daughter's attorney pushed back twice. On the third draft, she signed it. I was in my kitchen making coffee when Paul called to tell me. I stood at the window looking at the yard and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't fully realized I'd been holding. Irene called me that same afternoon. The voice on the phone was different from the voicemails. Quieter, like she'd finally stopped running and had to face whatever was waiting when she stopped. Dad. Hey, sweetheart. A long pause. I owe you an apology, a real one. Another pause, not because the attorney said to, because I've been thinking about what I actually said to you last Tuesday. Come in as a customer, or don't come in at all. She let that sit there between us. I can't believe I said that to you. You did, though, I said, gently but clearly. I know, her voice caught. I got scared, of what you thought of how I was running things, of you seeing the numbers. We had a really rough second year, and I didn't want you to know. And I started keeping you at arm's length, and I told myself it was for the business, but it wasn't. It was because I was embarrassed and I didn't want to let you down. I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post near the roses, that particular sharp red against the new green. Why didn't you just tell me? I said. A rough year. I've had rough years. I wouldn't have thought less of you. I know that now. A breath. I thought I had to have it all figured out before I could let you back in. We talked for almost an hour. Not about the legal documents or the equity structure or the certified letters. About her mother, a little. She'd been leaning on that loss more than I'd known. About the loneliness of running a business and being too proud to show anyone the underside of it. About how, somewhere in all of that, she'd started seeing my presence as pressure instead of support, and she hadn't known how to say so, and she'd handled it badly. I listened to all of it. Can we start over? She asked near the end. We don't have to start over, I said. We just have to do better. The quarterly report for the first period under the new agreement arrived in my email 8 weeks later. It was thorough, clearly organized, and showed a business that had genuinely turned a corner. The corporate accounts she'd been building were paying off, margins were improving, they'd hired 2 new people. At the bottom of the last page, in her cursive again, she'd written a handwritten note. These numbers are real. I'm not scared to show them to you anymore. Love, Irene. I printed that page and put it on my refrigerator. The restructuring meant that once a quarter I'd drive the 40 minutes to Savannah and sit down with Irene and go over the business together. Not as someone she was managing, but as a partner. The first meeting was awkward in the way that repair always is. Too careful, too aware of itself. The second was better. By the third, she was showing me supply chain problems before they became crises and asking my opinion on whether to expand to a second location. What do you think? She asked, sliding the lease proposal across the table. I put on my reading glasses and went through it. The numbers were there. The location made sense. The risk was real but manageable if the timing was right. I think you should wait 6 months, I said. Get through the holiday season at full capacity here first, then pull the trigger in the spring. She looked at the proposal for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, she said. Yeah, that makes sense. We ordered lunch after. She told me about a new supplier she'd found for Georgia pecans, the kind of detail you only share with someone you trust. I told her about a trip I'd been thinking about taking. Nothing dramatic, just the mountains of North Carolina for a week or two, somewhere quiet. She said I should go. Said I'd earned the rest. I didn't tell her that I'd booked the cabin 2 weeks before she said that. I'd already been learning, slowly, that some decisions didn't require anyone's approval but my own. The roses in my backyard came back again this spring, same as always. I spent a Saturday morning in April working along the fence line, trimming back the dead wood from winter so the new growth had room. It's slow work, and it requires knowing the difference between what's dead and what's just dormant. Cut the wrong thing and you lose something. Leave the wrong thing and it takes over. My wife had known how to do that by instinct. I've had to learn it. But I'm learning. If this story meant something to you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are. Click the box on the left for the next story. Thank you for being here. I've been thinking a lot about what I would have done if I hadn't kept those documents. If I'd signed the papers the way Irene asked, quickly, trusting, not reading the fine print, and then had nothing to point to when she told me I had no place in that business. I think about that version of the story sometimes, and it doesn't end well. It ends with an old man sitting on a bar stool feeling foolish and powerless, with nowhere to put his grief except inward. The thing that saved me wasn't luck. It was 40 years of factory habit. Keep the records, file the paperwork, never throw away anything with your name on it. I didn't do that because I was suspicious of my own daughter. I did it because that's who I am. And when the moment came that required me to know who I was ready. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the legal outcome, not the equity percentage, not even Irene's apology, as much as that mattered to me. What I keep coming back to is the question of character, and whether it holds when it's being tested by someone you love. Because that's the hardest kind of test there is. A stranger mistreats you and your sense of self stays mostly intact. You can be angry, you can walk away, you can move on without losing much. But when it's your own daughter looking you in the eye and telling you that your money was a gift and your presence is unwelcome, that cuts in a different place. That has the power to make you doubt yourself in ways that have nothing to do with the legal facts. I sat in that diner with my eggs and my coffee, and I had to ask myself honestly, was I interfering? Was I the problem? Had I been so present, so watchful, that I'd made her feel suffocated in something she'd built? I considered all of it seriously because that's what honesty requires. You have to be willing to find yourself at fault before you decide you aren't. And what I found, when I looked clearly, was that I had been respectful, patient. I had asked reasonable questions at appropriate intervals and accepted being pushed away without pushing back. The fault was not in my involvement. The fault was in her decision to erase what I was rather than talk to me about what she needed. There's a difference between a mistake made in a moment of fear and a pattern of behavior that accumulates over years. Irene's rough second year, her embarrassment, her silence, I understand all of that now, and I have genuine compassion for it. But she didn't push me away once in a hard moment. She built a wall, brick by brick, over months, and then told me the wall was my fault for standing too close to it. What I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way, the kind of learning that costs something, is that love without honesty is not love. It is management. And when someone who loves you starts managing you instead of talking to you, the most decent thing you can do for both of you is to stop being manageable. I didn't do that to punish Irene. I did it because the alternative was to keep shrinking, to keep accepting less, until there was nothing left of me that she had to reckon with. And a father who has disappeared entirely cannot help his daughter with anything, not the hard seasons, not the least decisions, not the things she's too proud to say out loud. The roses came back this spring. They always do. That's the thing about what's genuinely rooted. It doesn't need your permission to survive the winter. It just needs you to cut back what's dead and give the living parts room to grow. I think people are like that too. If they're willing to do the hard pruning on themselves,